Let's look at the fourth and final logic game in this set. As a reminder, we'll be working off of the June 2007 LSAT because that's a test that's available for free on the LSAT website. The introductory paragraph to the problem goes as follows. There are exactly 3 recycling centers in Rivertown, Center 1, Center 2, and Center 3. Exactly 5 kinds of material are recycled at these recycling centers: glass, newsprint, plastic, tin, and wood. Each recycling center recycles at least 2, but no more than 3 of these kinds of material. The following conditions must hold. So the first thing we want to do is think about how we want to set up this game. Now we can think of this game typically as a grouping game because we're really grouping these 5 types of material into the 3 centers. Alternatively, we can think about this being a form of an assignment game because we're either assigning recycling material to centers, or you can think of it as assigning centers to recycling material. In either case, this is a game where a grid setup is probably going to be helpful for us, so let's do that and then go from there. So you notice here that I made a simple grid with the centers along the top and the types of material going down the side. The other thing that we want to think about after we've made our grid is we want to make sure that we take into account all of the information given in the original paragraph. So let's take a look at it again to see what's going on. So okay, well we have 3 centers, 5 kinds of material. Alright, we've done all that here. Then we have a statement that says each recycling center recycles at least 2, but no more than 3 of these kinds of material. Now we don't really want to trust ourselves to remember every little detail, so we want to write that down so that we can't forget. So if each center recycles either 2 or 3, we can just put 2 or 3 underneath each column of our diagram, just so we have that staring at us in the face, and it's going to be a lot harder to forget that way. The next statement just says the following conditions must hold, so at this point we really have taken everything into account that we can so far. You'll notice here that if each center has to recycle either 2 or 3 kinds of material, then we're going to have somewhere between 6, 2 plus 2 plus 2, and 9, 3 plus 3 plus 3, yeses in our grid here when we ultimately figure out what goes where. So let's look at the conditions that we're given now and see what we can do in terms of putting that information either in our grid directly or at least writing down the rules. The first rule says any recycling center that recycles wood also recycles newsprint. Now that's not something that has a direct application in our grid, but it is something that it's important to write down. So we can write that down as a conditional statement, and we want to understand what part is our if and what part is our then. Here, if we're saying any recycling center that recycles wood also recycles newsprint, that translates to if a recycling center recycles wood, then that recycling center recycles newsprint. So we can write that pretty simply. It's just if wood, then newsprint. And this is something that's super important to become familiar with so that you can effectively write down an if-then rule regardless of how the information is given to you in the sentence. The second statement says every kind of material that Center 2 recycles is also recycled at Center 1. Well, this is the same sort of conditional statement, and we can think of this as if something is recycled at Center 2, it's also recycled at Center 1. Now we're not talking about types of material, but we can write this in a similar fashion and say if 2, then 1. The third rule says only one of the recycling centers recycles plastic, and that recycling center does not recycle glass. Now we can put that as 2 separate rules. That's probably going to make it easier for us than have one rule that's actually conveying multiple pieces of information. So the first part of the rule, only one of the recycling centers recycles plastic. We can say that there's just one P. We can also put that here next to our grid and say there's only going to be one yes in this P row here. The second part says, and that recycling center does not recycle glass. So that's just another way of saying that plastic and glass cannot go together. So we can write that as follows. So that concludes our rules, and the next thing that we want to do is think about what deductions we can make up front with these rules. Because you've noticed, so far, we haven't been able to put anything into our grid here. That doesn't mean that we wasted our time in making the grid, because at the very least, even if we hadn't drawn this part, we would still need to write down the centers and the materials and these instructions here. So really the grid itself was just taking a few seconds for something that may end up being very helpful. But we want to say, given what we have here, is there any way that we can actually put things in our grid? What I notice here is that we have two conditional statements. If something recycles wood, it also recycles newsprint. Also that if something is recycled at center 2, center 1 is a follower on. If I were going to think about how to combine these rules, the main thing that sticks out to me is that plastic can only be recycled at one center. That would imply that it can't be recycled at a center that has a hanger on. So it can't be recycled at center 2, because it would have to also be recycled at center 1, which breaks a rule. So we actually can rule out the possibility that plastic is recycled at center 2. We can then go back and ask ourselves if there's anything else that we can conclude. But based on the rules that we have here, it doesn't seem to be the case. It is, however, worthwhile to take, say, 10 seconds, 15 seconds to look over the rules one final time to make sure that you haven't missed anything. But given that we've done all that we can up until this point, let's go to the questions. Question 1 in this game, or question 18 overall in the section, reads, which one of the following could be an accurate account of all the kinds of material recycled at each recycling center in Rivertown? So this is just the basic plain vanilla, which of the following configurations works type of question. I've written down the answer choices here, and the most effective way to approach this type of question is to use process of elimination. And like we talked about before, we have two options, either to go one rule at a time or to go one answer choice at a time. In this case, like in every other case that we've discussed, it's going to be more efficient to go one rule at a time because it just makes it easier to scan each of the answer choices for what we're looking for. So we can just look at the rules in order. In general, we can go in order. If there was one rule that was particularly difficult to check, you might want to look at that one last, because as you eliminate answer choices, you're not going to have to look at as many answer choices for a given rule. So if you have a rule that's difficult to check against an answer choice, you want to save that rule for last, because in all likelihood you only have to be checking it against 2 answer choices rather than 3, 4, or 5. But here it stands to reason that we can just go in order. So the first rule we have here is that if a center recycles wood, then it also recycles newsprint. We can look at our answer choices. See here, center 1 recycles wood, but we also have newsprint. Center 2 recycles wood, but it also has newsprint. Center 3 has wood, but no newsprint. So just based on that one rule, this answer choice breaks. And what we can do is we can cross it out. When you're doing this in your actual test book, you want to cross out the entire answer choice rather than just the letter, because as you're scanning, you're not looking so much at the letters, you're looking at the information. And you want to very clearly remember that you've already gotten rid of that answer choice so that you don't end up looking at it again and wasting time. You can look at choice B. So we don't see wood at center 1, so the rule becomes irrelevant. We don't see wood at center 2, so the rule is also irrelevant there. In center 3 we see wood, but we also see newsprint, so this is fine. Choice C, we see wood at center 1, but we also see newsprint. We don't see wood at center 2, so the rule does not apply. And we don't see wood at center 3, so the rule does not apply. Choice D, we don't see wood at center 1, so the rule does not apply. We don't see wood at center 2, so the rule does not apply. We see wood at center 3, but we also see newsprint, so the rule is satisfied. In choice E, we see wood at center 1, but we also see newsprint. We see wood at center 2, but we also see newsprint. And then we don't see wood at center 3. So this also satisfies the rule, and we are only able to get rid of one answer choice. So we just go to the next rule. The next rule says that anything that is recycled at center 2 is also recycled at center 1. So we can go through the 4 remaining answer choices and check against that rule. So here we have G, N, and T recycled at center 2, and all of those are recycled at center 1. So that satisfies the rule. Here we have in choice B, G, N, and T recycled at center 2, but then G, N, and W recycled at center 1. So we can identify T as something that is recycled at 2 but not 1, and therefore this rule is broken for choice C. Choice D, we have G and T at center 2, and we also have G and T at center 1. So this satisfies the rule, and be careful that you don't mistakenly take the rule to go in both ways, because it really just is one conditional statement rather than an if and only if type of situation. In choice E, we have N, P, and W recycled at center 2, and all of those things are recycled at center 1. So this satisfies the rule. So now we're down to 3 answer choices. So plastic is only recycled at 1 center, because that's a pretty easy one to check. In choice B, we have plastic at center 3 and center 3 only, so that's fine. In choice D, we have plastic at center 1 and center 1 only, so that's fine. Choice E, on the other hand, we have plastic at both center 1 and center 2, so this breaks the rule and it goes as an answer choice. We have one rule left to check, and that's that plastic and glass cannot go together. So here we only see plastic at center 3, and there's no glass, so that satisfies the rule. Here, on the other hand, in choice D, we see plastic at center 1, and we also see glass. So this rule gets broken, and the only answer choice left is choice B. Now there may be some times when you've gone through all of the rules that you've written here, and you still have 2 or more answer choices left. You need to ask yourself then, what haven't I checked? The next logical place to go, once you've looked at all these rules, is to make sure that the answer choices are satisfying all the things that you've written down outside of the rows and the columns in your diagram, and that you've written down elsewhere in the game. Because a large part of the difficulty with the logic games is keeping track of all the information that you're given. So you want to make sure that you don't forget anything, and that you don't freak out if you get to the bottom of this list and you still have multiple answer choices left.